What scares me is not just that the world has become so dangerous and that even we could soon face war. What makes it worse is that the government and a lot of the public seem to think, oh, that threat's not real, or they think, oh, it's okay to leave our military badly short of weapons and men. Yet right now, Communist China is threatening war to take over Taiwan. It's even practicing it. And it's threatened to cut the dirty neck of Japan's Prime Minister for saying Japan might defend Taiwan. Now, last night, the head of Australia's Office of National Intelligence, Andrew Shearer, warned of possible war in our region within the next 10 years.
Most consequentially, should deterrence break down, notwithstanding the efforts of our government and our allies, we would face a rising risk of major conflict in our region within the next decade.
And this comes after the release of an Australian Strategic Policy Institute report worrying about the same sort of thing, warning that China going to war in our region would be catastrophic for our economy and would cause divisions here. It warned that the Chinese language media, for a start, right here, was heavily influenced by Communist China propaganda and control. Joining me is Peter Jennings, a former Deputy Secretary for Strategy in the Defence Department and now Director of Strategic Analysis Australia. Peter, great to see you again. Andrew Shearer warning last night that if the West failed to deter China, and the West right now, as you know, looks pretty weak, we would face the risk of a major conflict in this region within the next 10 years. Is he right?
Absolutely he is. And in fact, there would be many people, myself included, that would say that it's likely to be on a much shorter time frame. Xi Jinping regularly tells his military to be ready for war by 2027, Andrew. So I don't think one can sort of set a date on this, but the risk of conflict really between now over the next term of Xi Jinping being Chinese paramount leader, I think is the critical time frame. I think it's very interesting that Andrew Shearer is doing this sitting next to Penny Wong in the Estimates Committee clip that you just showed. He's not doing this own motion. I think the government is clearly authorising him to make these comments, even though the Prime Minister and Penny Wong wouldn't want to say those sorts of things themselves. So they're leaving it to a couple of our senior intelligence agency heads to make the more hawkish case, as it were, that everything is not right with China. But I completely agree with you. If this is the future that we face, why is it that we are being so slow when it comes to lifting up defence spending? Why so many of our projects just seem to be, half a decade and more away in terms of equipping the Defence Force? We've really got to get moving quickly if we're going to build deterrence, and that is to try and persuade China that this is not the right course of action and that they should avoid military action really at all costs.
I would have thought, like a protest, that for a Chinese diplomat to say, the dirty neck of the Japanese Prime Minister should be cut off for even talking about defending Taiwan. We should be protesting there. You can't allow this rhetoric to go unchallenged. I'm just wondering how you think a war would actually happen. Would it really be like an invasion, or would it be in this grey area? I would imagine from the rehearsals I've seen that they would simply cut Taiwan off from sea transports and all the freight that they rely on.
That's probably the start of it, a kind of a slow strangulation strategy, which China regularly exercises every year by showing how they can surround Taiwan as an island. The problem is that it won't be limited to Taiwan. It'll push south to the Philippines, it'll push north to Japan. The Japanese, I think, have got a pretty realistic appreciation that they can't sit this one out. It's going to be something that impacts on their security, and it will certainly impact on ours. So we have to worry about China shutting down Australian critical infrastructure, using cyber technology to do damage to our grid, using espionage to reduce our capability to respond effectively to Chinese military operations in the region. China has a comprehensive plan. Taiwan is part of it, but the broader plan is to become the dominant military player in this part of the world. And we can't appease our way out of that situation, Andrew. We have to be prepared to lift our own military strength and to push back against China attempting to coerce us and tell us to behave and shut up, which is really the effect of their diplomacy these days. So Australia needs to get stronger, and I think frankly it isn't good enough just leaving it to our intelligence agency heads to sound the warning. Government needs to show some leadership on this, and that means strong comments coming from the PM and the Foreign Minister, which really at the moment they would go to great lengths to avoid actually saying.
Yeah, but without those comments, you can't make the case for the increased spending we need on defence, because spending, of course, requires pain from voters. They miss out on goodies. They have to spend on guns instead. You can't do that by, Andrew Shearer, a very nice guy, might be perfectly correct, but he doesn't make the case for that extra spending in the public debate. Now, what shape are we in to defend ourselves in any war, or even just to keep the economy going? How come the government hasn't seen, Taiwan's just added $60 billion of spending over the next several years to its defence. It's panicking. Japan has just announced record defence spending. Why shouldn't, maybe we should do something?
Yes, Taiwan has said it's going to lift its defence spending to 5% of gross national product by 2030, and we're a very, very long way away from that sort of goal. I'm sorry to say, Andrew, that I think our Defence Force is now less capable of deployed military operations than it was during most of my career in the department when we were active in East Timor and Iraq and Afghanistan and the Solomon Islands all at the same time. And the reason we're in this situation is because the spending on the current Defence Force is being squeezed in order to free money for investment into submarines, of which we won't actually see for the better part of a decade into the future. So there's a mismatch between where we're investing and when we expect to get that gear and the likely threat that we're facing, which the government doesn't want to address. And I think the only way I can really explain that is I think they've partly bought their own propaganda, which is that somehow they've managed to stabilise that relationship with China. But just because China is trading with us doesn't mean to say that Xi Jinping has changed his strategic objective to become the dominant military power in the Indo-Pacific. That's China's strategic goal. And it's the one we're refusing to address because our government would much prefer to be short-term in its thinking and maybe just think that they can sit this one out, leave it to the United States, and they won't be called upon to respond, which I can assure you was a mistake. That's not how the Americans think about the role that Australia should play.